Welcome to Fantasy Football Aces. It's your boy William Wolf. I'm back, and today we're going to talk about something that I think is invaluable when it comes to fantasy football, and that's a strategy that a lot of people don't follow, but you have to draft one of these quarterbacks when you're playing fantasy football. What do I mean by one of these quarterbacks? I mean a running quarterback. There's only 5 on my list this year, and if you're not drafting one of these 5 quarterbacks, you're making a mistake. Because if you do draft one of these 5 quarterbacks, you're guaranteed to make the playoffs. These quarterbacks with running ability are invaluable, as I said a second ago. They get forgotten. It's like having an extra running back on your fantasy roster with the ability to throw touchdowns as well. It makes no sense why people don't draft these guys. The short list of them is usually a little longer with Kyler Murray being hurt this year. But I got 5 guys that I'm going to count down, and let's start off with number 5. And that man is no other than Lamar Jackson. Now, I am counting this down in order as I believe that they are of value. I'm going to go from 5 to 1 and guys that I would draft in fantasy football this year, and I would draft only these 5 quarterbacks in my draft. In other words, if you're in Snake, you need to be figuring out when these guys are available. That way you can strategize your draft on where you want to take them. I've been going over this in all of my different live mock draft strategy, that you need to figure out when you could take one of these 5 quarterbacks. As I said, number 5, Lamar Jackson. His ADP is a little lower this year. You can get him usually in the 3rd or 4th round. Last year, Lamar Jackson, going over his stats, he had on 12 games, 2,242 passing yards, 17 TDs, 764 rushing yards on 12 games. This guy is absolutely fabulous. He has a new offensive coordinator in town. They're going to be running more plays. I have a feeling that he's going to be passing a little bit more. There's going to be more plays per game. That means that he's going to inevitably throw for more yards. He's got more weapons this year. He's got Bateman getting healthy. They drafted the kid in the 1st round. Mark Andrews is healthy. Offensive line is elite. It's a top 5 offensive line in the NFL. I don't see any reason why Lamar Jackson doesn't get back to the fantasy form that we have known when he was a top 5 guy. I think that he could easily be your number 1 quarterback this year. Any one of these guys can be number 1 quarterback. The one downside to Lamar Jackson is he's not the brightest guy at reading defenses and figuring out pre-snap reads and where he wants to go with the ball. But you can always count on him, this guy improvising, getting loose. And I believe even if the offense is geared towards him throwing the ball more, they're still going to have those design runs, at least 5 a game. He's going to rush for at least 10 rushes a game. I can imagine him averaging about 75 yards rushing a game. He'll have at least 7 or 8 touchdowns. I don't really believe in Dobbins. This is your real running back on the team. Go no other further than Lamar Jackson. He's a beast. At number 4, we have Justin Fields. Now, this is one of my personal favorites this year, drafting in fantasy football because of his value. Lamar Jackson, great value. Justin Fields, same value. They have around the same value. The difference is, I believe Justin Fields is the better version. Now, you can argue he doesn't have as good of weapons, but you have Cole Kmet. You got DJ Moore coming over. Mooney, who's getting a little bit more experience there. They got Claypool from Pittsburgh. I think just the offensive line, they spent some picks on them. They revamped it. I think that offensive line could be a lot better this year. I believe Justin Fields is in line to have a season sort of like Jalen Hurts did last year. Granted, he doesn't have the weapons that Jalen Hurts had, but I think he's more talented. I think that he can move better. I think that you haven't seen an athlete like this in the NFL besides Lamar Jackson and Michael Vick. And I'd argue that he's a bigger version and possibly faster. The plays that he made last year were absolutely electric. He broke at least 3 60-yard touchdowns. These are kind of plays that win you a week in fantasy football. This guy's ceiling is through the roofs, and all 5 of these guys, the reason their ceiling is so high each week is because of their rushing ability. I don't think that you should draft any quarterback in fantasy, and that includes Herbert with the LA Chargers, because they don't run. This is something that guarantees you a fantasy football playoff appearance as long as these guys stay healthy. Last year, Justin only played 15 games. He had 2,242 yards, 17 touchdowns. That's not that impressive numbers passing, but he had 1,143 yards rushing on 15 games. He's a force to be reckoned with running the ball. Not to mention all the rushing TDs he had last year. I believe that he can have, over 10 rushing touchdowns this year and over 1,000 yards. That's better than almost all the running backs are going to perform. It's absolutely insane. And this guy's going to be throwing the ball too. He looks better. I think DJ Moore can really get involved this year. I think Justin Fields is probably a guy that you should target in your fantasy football draft simply based off value. You can build a team around him, and then the difference between possibly these next 3 quarterbacks that I'm going to name and Justin Fields is not going to be that big of a disparity. Therefore, you can build a great team around him and still have a top quarterback, right? I think Justin Fields is going to compete for an MVP this year. I think that he could possibly be the #1 quarterback in all of fantasy, and that is not a Chicago Bears bias, who I'm a fan of, by the way. At number 3, Josh Allen. This is no surprise. Some people would have him at 2 or 1. Josh Allen's a monster. He's been a monster ever since he's come into the league. Last year, 4,283 yards, 35 touchdowns, 762 rushing yards on 16 games. He was a little banged up last year with that little injury he had, I believe, against the Jets. Allen's consistency is unmatched. A lot of people that had Josh Allen won their fantasy football league last year, including my friend John Beneker in my big fantasy league, $2,000 buy-in. He won with Josh Allen. He frankly carried him into the playoffs. His team wasn't so complete, but once you make the playoffs, just like March Madness, everybody's got a shot. It's one and done. Anybody can win. It doesn't matter if you're a favorite or not. When you draft one of these kind of quarterbacks, the point I'm trying to make it is these guys will lead you to the playoffs, which should be your only goal in fantasy football. Of course, the ultimate goal is winning, but if you make the playoffs, you give yourself a shot. And when you draft one of these quarterbacks, you make the playoffs every year. I see the data. It's very rare that you can mess this up when you have one of these quarterbacks, because they're so consistent. They're the top scorers in fantasy football. And when you have one of them, it just makes a huge difference between your other league mates who possibly have good teams, and they're just scrambling to get good quarterback play every week. They're trying to find a guy who can score more than 20 points. These guys are a dime a dozen. I only have 5 on my list this year. Josh Allen, obviously, he's got Stephon Diggs, a pass-happy offense. I think Cook could be a big asset for him this year, throwing the ball. I think that Cook can make some plays for him on little 2-yard screen passes that he turned into 70-yard touchdowns. Guess what? That's going to Josh Allen's stats. He's big. He's durable. He doesn't get hurt that much. Josh Allen, he's a no-brainer kind of pick. You take him with your eyes closed, and you know he's going to perform. At number 2, now this guy could be number 1, and frankly, most people out there are going to put him at number 1, and I don't blame you. I had Patrick Mahomes last year. I had him as a guy who led me to the number 1 ranking in my $2,000 salary cap league. I had the most points in the league. This guy carried me some weeks and won me weeks just on his own when the rest of my team was struggling. Patrick Mahomes was the MVP, the Super Bowl winner, the Super Bowl MVP. He's the best quarterback in the NFL. He's the one guy on my list that doesn't scramble that much, but he does scramble. 5,250 yards last year, 41 touchdowns thrown. He added another 358 yards on the ground. I think he rushed for 2 or 3 touchdowns. 2 of them were in the same game. His game, he's a masterclass. Mahomes' creativity, the way he can improvise, move around. Him and Travis Kelce have something that, frankly, no other quarterback and tight end or no other quarterback and receiver have ever had. They just know what the other person is thinking. When you take Patrick Mahomes, granted, you're going to have to take him in the 2nd round this year. There's no there's no risk in this play, right? You can build a team around him. You take Patrick Mahomes in the second round, even probably can take Travis Kelce in the first round. That's guaranteeing you a playoff spot. When you got that duo, mark them down as making the playoffs. There's going to be no regression there. Andy Reid's going to keep evolving. He's going to keep creating plays that no one's seen. Patrick Mahomes' talent is second to none. He is the best quarterback in the NFL. You cannot miss on Patrick Mahomes. And at number one, obviously you could have figured this out by now. It could only be one guy, and that is Jalen Hurts. On 15 games last year, 3,691 yards, 22 touchdowns. He rushed for 763 yards on 13 rushing touchdowns. Now, if he played the full amount of games last year, you're talking about a guy who would have been over 1,000 yards rushing. He would have been over 4,000 yards passing. He has the best offensive line in the NFL. He has A.J. Brown, an elite number one receiver. Then he has another elite number one receiver on the other side in Devontae Smith. He's got an elite tight end in Dallas Goedert. He's got DeAndre Swift coming in town. He's got a plethora of different running backs that are going to do work for him. They all can catch the back out of the backfield. Gainwell, Swift, I already mentioned, and even Penny can catch the ball out of the backfield. The one downside I see to Jalen Hurts this year is that he has a really tough schedule. Last year, they had a really easy schedule. You can go and look at this if you don't believe me. This year, the schedule is extremely tough. They finished number one in the division. They're facing all elite number one teams from each division. They match up with a tough division out west. They have a tough schedule this year, but I don't think that's going to stop Jalen Hurts. The talent on that team is immense. They have the most loaded roster in the NFL, and they have the most loaded offense in the NFL. And on top of that, their offensive line is the best in the NFL, and you know how much I value offensive lines. Jalen Hurts is a can't-miss player. The one other downside to him is that you're going to have to invest a second-round pick. You're going to have to do that with Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen. In salary cap, which is what I play, you're going to spend about $30, but they're well worth it. When you take one of these guys, you're guaranteed to make the playoffs. These are my top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy football, and these are the only quarterbacks you should be taking. If you are building a great team around and you don't have one of these 5 quarterbacks, there's a chance you don't make the playoffs. All of that needs to happen is one of your guys that you drafted, otherwise your running back, your elite running back or receiver, they miss 6 games. Guess what? You're going to miss the playoffs. Now, you can make the argument, if one of these guys get hurt, then you're going to miss the playoffs, but it's less likely. And when you take one of these guys, they carry you. These guys are going to score 30 points a week, and their ceilings are 50 points a week. And when they do one of those, you mark it down as a dub. These guys alone will win you 7 weeks, 7-8 weeks. That means the guys that you draft around them just have to do decent, and you can add a couple more wins there, and you're in the playoffs. Then when you're in the playoffs, who knows? Roll them dice, and you possibly can win a fantasy football championship. I got nothing else for you. This video I am most passionate about. If you do not take one of these 5 quarterbacks, you're making a mistake. Please listen to me when it comes to this philosophy. All my philosophies are very important, but I would say this is probably the number one philosophy I've had. I've always stuck by this. I've only deterred from it very rarely, and each time that I've done that, I've missed the playoffs. Russell Wilson happened to be one of those his last year in Seattle, but he got hurt, and he was starting to go on the downhill at that point. But he's a rushing quarterback. As I said, that's the kind of guy you want to go after, rushing quarterbacks. Kyler Murray would be on the list if he was healthy. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share. Let's fucking go. Fantasy Football Aces. We're going to keep this rolling all year, and we're going to win some fantasy football championships. Peace.